typically come here and they want to ask about the history and about the Hawaiian Revival. The Hawaiian Revival was a time when thousands of Hawaiians put their faith in Christ, linked up with ministries around the islands, and Hawaii became the most Christian nation in the world at that time. The literacy rate, all those sort of educational things was the highest of any other country per capita than any place in the world at that time in the middle 1800s. Titus Cone was not the first minister to come here. He was probably about the sixth. There was a few earlier, but the ministry really didn't take off until the Second Great Awakening was starting to really blossom on the East Coast. Charles Finney was one of the great revivalists at that time. And Titus Cone had been greatly influenced by Charles Finney, had been part of those revival experiences on the East Coast. So he came to Hawaii with that same passion and zeal in his heart, filled with the Spirit, filled with love for the people. It was only 3 months after he arrived here that he was able to preach a message in Hawaiian language. It was only 3 months to adequately learn the Hawaiian language. That is obviously a Spirit-given gift. And so he came to be loved by they called him Papa Cohen. His house was across the street on the property that the apartments is right now. His biography, or autobiography I should say, is online. If you go to our church link, you can link to it and you can read it all without buying the book. But buying the book is cool. And my wife put a couple of the major events that occurred here with building the church, the revival, tidal waves, and things like that. The vast majority of his book, though, records his experiences with Kilauea volcano. About half the book talks about experiencing the lava blast, the sounds, the experiences. That book itself and his memoirs are part of the curriculum here at the university, especially the geology and the history of Hawaii, because there are no other better first-person accounts of Kilauea during this time. And so they know which lava flows went where, and they have his accounts of what they sounded like and felt like and smelled like and all that sort of stuff. So you really feel like you're there. During the mid-1830s, he traveled the entire region, and what was unique about him was he really cared for people, and he kept journals with him, where he would go into a village and talk to the village elders and write down the names of everybody in the village. And then as they made spiritual decisions, he would keep track of where they were with their spiritual decisions. And so years later, he'd come back to the village, he'd pop out the journal and he'd say, you know, what's going on with these people? Are they being faithful? Are they serving the Lord? Are they falling away? New ones being born? Are these people passed away? And I think those records are probably in the mission house in Honolulu, or maybe even on the East Coast back in the American Board of Commissions for Foreign Missions. But the major revival time, he kept track of how many people he brought into fellowship. In 1838, he brought in 639, and that would be a massive revival for any church. But in 1839, he brought in 5,244, which is a heart attack to me. I was like, how can you keep up with this many people? And the next year, 1,500 brought in. Over the period of his ministry, 40 years, he recorded over 12,000 people coming into faith and faithful membership in the church. And you have to understand that this is a New England style ministry, and so membership is different from attending. This was actually the membership. So there were thousands more that attended, but not stepped into actual membership itself. And membership was a very strict thing, that you were held accountable. If you desired to be a member and receive the benefits of membership, you were held accountable for a faithful, discipled walk with Jesus. And so the number that I always like to poke out here is that he actually dismissed 3,546 members. What pastor nowadays would ever dismiss people from their numbers because we value numbers so much? And you know what? They cared about discipleship. And if they weren't being faithful, and if they were committing adultery, if they were out having drunken parties, if they were, known for bad behavior, they would step them out of membership. Doesn't mean they stopped attending necessarily, because there's thousands more that attended. I think people implied that there was as many as 15,000 that would be around here throughout its busy seasons of life. Church historians say that this was the largest church in the world during that time and era. There was no other church that had that many people participating and being a part of ministry. This building obviously couldn't manage that many people. They had multiple services, and then they created more chapels. And that's like this bell that he was mentioning over here. This bell is actually from Kapiolani Chapel, which is down Kinooli Street. The chapel's gone, but the property is still owned by church people. In fact, the granddaughter of Reverend Stephen DeShay Sr. is the one that let us keep the bell. Because when the chapel went down, it's next to his property, the grandfather's property, who was here for 40 years. And this church developed its more current status in the community because of the DeShay influence during that time. He was an authoritative figure here. His son became a judge. He was a territorial governor, no, he wasn't governor, he was a territorial councilman or something like that. He had big responsibilities. So, Hilo Church has gone through many changes, of course. When the mission officially closed down in the 1860s, so really you can't say missionaries anymore after the 1860s, the churches were slowly turned over to local leaders who took the reins and moved things forward. The church, after Titus Cohen passed, so the church kind of naturally shrank down after the leader had passed. People moved around a little bit more. There was immigration that came into Hawaii, which kind of diluted the Hawaiian influence here. The partner with Titus Cohen was David Lyman, whose mission house and museum is right up the street. He had a passion for education, and so he founded Hilo Boarding School. And Hilo Boarding School trained young Hawaiian men to have a trade and to have a Christian background in education. Many of those became governmental leaders in Hawaii because of their good training. That was one of the things that it was woodworking. This actual table is a very fancy curly koa table. It has many years of patina on it because it's over 100 years old. It was used as our communion table for years and years and years. If it was all put back to its original state, nice, bright, and shiny, it would be spectacular. But with antiques, you never remove the patina, so we'll never upgrade it the way it would be. But it's from the Hilo Boarding School, along with this old koa chair. When the offering would be taken, to keep accountability, this table, which is right next to the pulpit as the preacher is preaching, the head deacon would sit at this chair next to the table up there, and everyone would watch him count the money. And in the old style, what they do is they would count by families, and the families would have record of what they give. And in the really old style, they'd actually report how much each family gave out publicly, and the Kauaha family gave this, and the Kondolui family gave this, and the Waipio family gave this, and they would do that sort of thing. That's Polynesian style. It still happens around the Western Polynesian area. But David Lyman was a great fit with Titus. Titus was a different personality. He was the flamboyant, the outgoing, the spirit-driven evangelist. David Lyman was the more detail-oriented, educationally minded, stay-at-home sort of person. So while he's out on his evangelistic jaunts, David Lyman would stay and would manage the ministry, and it was just a great fit for 40 years. I mean, how often would you find two totally different men partnering together for 40 years in ministry in the same place? It's a very rare combination. I don't think you can testify to that happening many other places at all.